talking about fulfilling the dream and some of the challenges of fulfilling the dream. And one of the important things about the backdrop that we're dealing with right now is that we're in a critical historical moment where the very nature of the dream is being contested, where the very question about what is the dream and what's its relationship to this contemporary society is really being challenged. First of all, the very idea about the dream comes from Martin Luther King's March on Washington speech, which is part of our national heritage. We say it all the time, particularly in January, but basically when we talk about the future of America, you know, we talk about this notion of the dream, and that part of his speech gets talked about all of the time. There's another part of his speech that doesn't always get talked about, and it's the preamble of his speech, where he says we're coming to Washington to cash a promissory note, a promise that when we went to the bank to cash it was basically stamped insufficient funds. So there's an idea in the dream that there's something that needs to be done, there's something owed, there's something amiss, there is a debt that needs to be filled, and we need to take affirmative efforts to make sure that happens. We need tools and language not only to fight back across the aisle, but in order to make ourselves understandable to ourselves. If facts don't fit the frame, people reject the facts. And one of our problems fighting affirmative action is that we're in someone else's frame. It's sort of like, do you still beat your wife, right? Preferences, yes or no. Reverses discrimination, are we for it or against it? When you have to say, we're for it, you're basically in someone else's frame and you're not going to win. So we have to figure out alternative framings to defend affirmative action. Here's the most common frame. Equal opportunity in American society, it's just a race. The people who are the swiftest, who are most prepared, who are most talented are the ones that win. And so affirmative action is a problem. Why is affirmative action a problem? Well, we have a few winners who get out ahead, not because they're the fastest runner, not because they're the smartest, but because they got a head start around the track. Interestingly and problematically enough, both sides of the affirmative action debate use this myth, and they use the same kind of idea. So those against affirmative action, they'll give you all of the reverse discrimination, inefficiency kind of arguments. It's unfair to the other runners. Many of our allies will say, well, but you got to give them a head start in order for people to even have a chance at winning the race. What they both have in common is they're both focusing on the runner. They're both assuming that the race is basically the same and that affirmative action is taking some people and putting them out ahead of others and then blasting the gun out. We can't win with that kind of metaphor. We can't win when we accept the backdrop that the race is actually an equitable race and that the problem is that our runners are disabled, that our runners can't really make it around the track without a head start. What if we had a different way of imagining the track? Rather than focusing on disabled runners, people who can't really run it without help, we focused on the differential conditions of the track so that not everybody is running the same race. Some people are running races with potholes, with all sorts of debris on the track, with unpassable lanes, with some lanes that don't even go to the finish line but go to prison. We're not talking about a preference. Right? When we're talking about removing the obstacles, it's not a preference to remove an obstacle. It's correcting the race where it's problematic. And I can't help but end with our favorite track. Notice the guy on the little inside lane. First of all, he's running a shorter lane anyway. So he's likely to win, even if he is running. But better yet, he doesn't even have to run, right? His identity, his connections, just deliver him onto a people mover, and all he does is assume the pose and gets delivered to the White House. Right? So, it's important. It's important that we fight back against this framing. This guy really has the audacity to be the one who's the spokesperson against affirmative action, right? When he is the greatest beneficiary of the worst form of affirmative action that you could possibly think of. So these are the kinds of interventions that we think we need in order to talk to ourselves more honestly, more directly about the dangers of colorblindness. Colorblindness would tell us not to look at any of these obstacles. We've got to be able to put it in our discourse and find ways of communicating this. And the last thing I'll say is our young people, they're the ones that really need these messages more than anything. They're the future voters. They're the ones who are going to inherit this moment. For the most part, our teenagers were born during the Bush administration. So they're 2 generations removed from the civil rights movement, 2 generations removed from the history that you were talking about. They don't understand that this is part of the civil rights legacy. They were born during the mended don't end it period. So we've got to come up with ways of communicating both the imperative of social justice, the justifiability of talking about these issues, and language that make it resonant with them as well as the American public. Thank you.